Now you're welcome along. We are talking some League of Ireland football, but in particular the European campaigns of both Shelbourne and Shamrock Rovers, which have officially come to an end. Qualification to the knockout stages was beyond them before last night, but in their final games, Rovers signed off with a 3-1 win at home to Hamron Spartans from Malta. Big crowd there, big away crowd there, and that's 400k in the bank for that win, a reminder of the huge money on offer in Europe. Shels, meanwhile, drew 0-0 away with Celje in Slovenia. Happy to say, to reflect on the last 6 games, the European campaign at large. Aidan Fitzmaurice with us in studio. Aidan, thanks for coming in.
Yep.
And Dan McDonnell here as well. Daniel, hello.
Hello.
I should say our football show is sponsored by Sky Sports and Sports Extra, where you can watch every live Premier League match this season. So on Sky this weekend, Liverpool travelling to Spurs, that's the 5:30 kickoff. Everton Arsenal at 8, and then Aston Villa Manchester United is Super Sunday, and of course coverage of the World Darts Championship continues across the week as well. Sportsmas has officially begun. You can watch Sky Sports and Sports Extra on Sky, or stream them with now. I feel we should read that in tandem, and you should do the Sportsmas line, Dan.
Yeah, well, I think across the week your reading of Sportsmas has become slightly more enthusiastic now, you know.
The last time the three of us were in a room together, it was fairly ad hoc at the back of the press conference room, the Aviva Stadium, and Ireland had just snatched a 2-2 draw with Hungary, and we were thinking, I don't know what to make of that. But it all worked out.
A lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Half full or half empty, that was the debate on that night, you know.
Yeah. It was empty 3 days later in Armenia.
Very empty.
Yeah. But it's full again.
Yeah.
So I'm curious genuinely to know what you make of these European campaigns. I guess at a glance you'd say disappointing in that, Shelbourne with 2 points to their name after 6 games, 34th of 36 teams in the Conference League. And then Rovers, with that win last night, go to 4 points, so 31st of 36 teams. Just one broader question. I mean, it does strike you, and Rovers now are in their second year of this. Like, you glance at the calendar and it's President's Cup 31st of January. Summer football has a lot of pluses to it, but these guys don't get a break.
No, but their athletes are different nowadays. They don't really have the approach, the mentality before, and even a lot of them, even when they have a break, they're probably in the gym. I think back in the League of Ireland players, I'm talking 30 years ago, would have a full summer off, whereas now these guys
winter well back then.
Yeah, but they're gym bunnies now. You know, they probably are. So you hear these stories. Somebody might be away on holidays in Dubai or somewhere with their family, but they're probably jogging, or in the gym. You know, they're a little bit different. So,
and have they talked about burnout or feeling like, God, I just need to get off the treadmill for a while now?
It's something Steve Bradley's spoken about as a club. They've tried to research and learn from, and how do you do it? Do you give them full time off? Do you take? I don't know. I don't understand. I'm not a physio, but do you take a complete break? Does your body need a complete break for a week or 2 or 3 weeks? Or is that bad for you? Do you need to keep doing something, keep going to the gym? So I don't know, but it's something that Rovers, Bradley said a few times that they're going to learn lessons from last year. I think we'll talk about that in a minute, but to progress, you can't just put a full stop on the season and say we go again, to learn from the lessons. And Shamrock Rovers are getting there in terms of that side of things, sports science, diet, recovery. What's the right thing to do? Just because we always did things a certain way doesn't mean it's the right way.
Yeah. Dan, what are you hearing from either players or management on that front?
Yeah, well, I see Shels is the first time doing it, so we'll see. Rovers, yeah, it's a constant slug. I thought they were quite poor last night, really. Like, in the sense that, and not poor, but like, they won the game, but they were off it. And you could sense, and look, I think there was an element of, you could see Stephen Bradley afterwards knew that as well, that they just hadn't been at it, and you were looking at it going, wow, this is your 55th game of season, and also you did this last year. Like, they're effectively in a never-ending season now. Like they have a 3-week break now, with the way you break now for, say, international breaks. At times during the season, once or twice they've had maybe like 2-week breaks, so it's comparable length to your off season, and then between the FAI Cup final and the game with Shakhtar, they had a break that wouldn't be dissimilar in length to your end of season break. And I saw actually quite a few of the players went to Dubai during that time or went on holidays. So there is a fear that, like, and this is the wonder of the Rovers season, because previously all the other Irish clubs that have had a group stage or league phase, as it is now, campaign, have had a little bit of a hangover in the following year. And like, Rovers went so deep last year and were playing Molde in February. and looked a bit sluggish at the start of the season. People thought this is going to catch up. It hasn't. But then you still end up having this question for next year, because I was just looking at the game last night, and like Lee, their back three has been so good. Lee Grace is injured. Dan Cleary picks up an injury. Pico's going to be at the World Cup for a chunk of next year. I think this has to catch up with them eventually, but it's to their credit that it hasn't this year. And Bradley did speak at length afterwards about how, look, you almost have to when people maybe in March are saying, geez, they've started the season slowly, there's an acknowledgement that they have to train to peak, and they're now training. Aidan's alluded to it in terms of what they've learned, that they probably know this season when to peak, and you can't just maintain that level. And I think even in our reflections maybe in this campaign, I think Rovers in the league phase have been past their peak. I think they really peaked in August when they were playing against Santa Clara to qualify. They were so good in those two games. I did both two games. They haven't been at that level at all in the last 2 weeks. Just so sloppy and off it. And you can't make excuses for it. You have to have a higher standard, and I think they need to be better. But I do think that constant treadmill thing is probably likely to catch up with you at times, and there's no sense of this stopping. I think Rovers will be in the groups again next year, so it's going to be it's just going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling, and I don't know how.
Very much so, and you just wonder. I mean, it'll be there's a guinea pig aspect to this, as Aidan said. Teams are learning. Shels very much so. Fascinated in 10 years' time, will there be some early retirements, and will certain players be saying, "God, that 4, 5, 6 years where we just had that run in Europe and kept going, it got me." But who knows? Maybe not. Let's start with Shelbourne. We'll come on to Rovers. So, like I said, from their 6 games, just 2 points, 34th of 36. Reminder of the campaign. So, people will remember the drama around the Linfield wins and Duff's exit, 5-1 in aggregate, and so into the group stages. They started off at home to Hacken, 0-0 draw. This was in October. And then they were away in North Macedonia. This one perhaps set the tone for their campaign against Skenja, in that they lost 1-0 and it was a 91st minute own goal. And then into November, 1-0 defeat at home to Drita. Alkmaar away, 2-0. And then Crystal Palace at Tallaght Stadium a couple of weeks ago, where they were beaten 3-0 by a very impressive Palace, you would have to say. It was quite something when Palace then went out and lost 3-0 to City a few days later. You get a real lesson in levels. And then, Aidan, you kept an eye last night on the Celja game, which finished 0-0. You don't need to be John Nash there to figure out the pattern. 6 games and 0 goals scored.
And they had chances. It's not like they just went out and looked for a 0-0 draw in every game last night. They had... Now, Vesselspiel, the goalkeeper, did make probably 5, 6, 7 very, very good saves. But probably the 2 best chances were, one was from John Martin, and we needed a shot saved, and then 2 minutes to go, he put a cross in for Kerr McEnroy, who just really kind of came at it off balance and hit it wide. So they had chances. It's not like they just sat back and possession wise last night was probably heavily in favour of, not heavily, but in favour of Celja, but they had chances, but they just can't score. So I think when Shelbourne assess the campaign, they'll look at that and go, those moments. And it frustrates me sometimes when you talk to people, manage their players after a game, and said finer margins killed us, and that's football. I remember before Shelbourne played Crystal Palace, I was looking back over previous games, the last 2 times an Irish club played an English club, which was Chelsea and Shamrock Rovers last year, and Dundalk and Arsenal 2020. And the quotes from both camps, Dundalk and Rovers, were, we gave up soft goals, we didn't take our moments when we had them. And you can't keep saying that. You can't say, well, we gave them... they didn't tear us apart. We gave them the goals, and Shels did that against Crystal Palace. Particularly, I think it was the third one where Pino, his name was, Spanish international. Well, nobody went near him. Nobody put a tackle in him. And Joey Bryan said after, if we conceded that in the league, I'd be hugely annoyed. Put a tackle in. If he's a brilliant world class, he's a Spanish international, 19 caps. He's better than anything Shelbourne had, better than anything in our league. So he is a good player, but you put in a tackle. So Shelbourne had the chances, but they just didn't. And I think we'll see over the winter how Shelbourne, we'll talk about that in a minute, but how Shelbourne react. Is the squad they have good enough to compete at that? Because you may, and it's always drilled into players in Europe, you might get one chance, and coaches have been saying this of our teams in years. You go to wherever, you go to Sweden or Norway, you play in Rosenborg, playing a big team, Legia Warsaw, you may only get one chance. You have to take it. There's no point in coming back and saying we had chances. You need to put them away, and they didn't put them away.
Yeah, because domestically, across the 36 game season, they only scored 8 goals fewer than Rovers. So it's not, I'm not saying they're shooting the lights out, but in the midst of this European campaign, they're putting 3 on Sligo, they're putting 3 on Bow. So it's not like they just can't score.
Yeah.
But at that level, they weren't taking their chances.
Yeah, no, and defenders are better. And again, the opposition last night, the Celje goalkeeper, Laban, he's a Slovenian international. Only a couple of caps, he's not number one, but he's a senior international. A lot of the time you're up against a better standard of player. The defenders are better. I was looking at some of the moments last night at one stage where their defender basically pulled down Sean Boyd. He got away with it. It was a foul, but it wasn't given. He just knew what to, because he's an elite level player. He was able to get away with that. And that moment went away from Shels because their defender knew how to manage the Irish forward. But yeah, they've had the chances, but just haven't put them away. Meatbo in particular will be speaking to some Shels fans in Alkmaar last month. The Shelbourne fans, they like Meatbo, but hugely frustrated with his delivery in terms of goals. He was very good last night. His work rate was. You really found it hard to deal with Meatbo last night, but he didn't score.
Well, he's a live wire.
Yeah,
but he's not reliable at a crucial moment. So I guess the interesting question I'd love your opinion on is, you make very fair points about standard of player versus opposition. Have they underachieved here based on the gap you're seeing between the squad that Joey O'Brien has and what he's going up against? Is 2 points about right, or have they underachieved?
They've underachieved because the games were there, particularly the opposition. Look, Crystal Palace at home, you're never going to win. I mean, Crystal Palace again I always look at the opposition. Crystal Palace, they made a few changes from the previous Premier League game. Not Palace last night made 11, but for the Shels game they only made 4, and some of those would have been enforced through injury. Palace still had 10 internationals on the team in Tallaght Stadium. So I think you judge games, and Rovers are like this as well. Bradley wouldn't have looked at Shakhtar as a game where you target, if you get something that's a bonus, you target games like Breidablik and Hamrun and games like that. And Shelbourne would have targeted Drita, Skendia. Though they're the games where you need to make up the points so you can swallow a loss to Crystal Palace or a loss or a draw to Celje.
That's baked in.
And they fell down on those targets.
They fell down.
Yeah.
Okay. Daniel, your overall assessment, sort of same question, and they fell down. Why for you did they fall?
I will say goal scoring has been a problem for them all season. I know they scored some goals towards the end of it, but generally I think if you're talking the story of Shelbourne's season, it has been a failure to take chances at key points. Like that was, early in the season they would have 80% possession in games and they were losing 1-0. So I think their story of their season has not been taking chances. I think their campaign is a mad one to assess because in 5 of their 6 games in the group stages, they had big chances at 0-0 in the second half. In the second half, not just like on the 10th minute. Like John Martin in the 3 away games that they played, and not to pick out John Martin, but like he hit the post against Shendike in the 65th minute, the 1-1 in Alkmaar in the 70th minute, the 1-1 last night in the 72nd minute. Like I know Aidan's not a big golf lover, right? You don't want these golf analogies that sort of bore in the clubhouse tells you after. I mean, if I just got those 4 birdie putts, I would have been 4 under. You're not going to take all your chances, right? If you have players here that, get one chance and they take it at this level, they're probably not playing in this league if they're that clinical. But Shels, I think I'm being conservative here. Like they should have 5-6 points. That's been generous. I think they could have got through. In reality, they could have got through. They actually played. I actually think, with the exception of the Palace game where they were way off it and they probably approached the game wrong and they were poor. And probably Shendike, they underperformed on the night. They weren't great. It was there to beat them and they didn't really take it. Drita, James Norris got sent off in the 20th minute. They played the entire game with 70 minutes of the game with 10 men and they still could have won it. Meepo missed one of the worst misses you'll ever see at any level. So
if you're continuously
I think they played well. Weirdly, it sounds weird.
But if you're continually missing chances, that's who you are.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I do appreciate what you're saying. I just think there's a real contrast between the two clubs. I feel like Shels actually probably, I just can't say that they underperformed. I think like they actually showed up in the games. Yeah. They just weren't remotely clinical enough. But for a team that's their first time ever in this level, it's been a funny one to assess because, with the exception of the Palace game where you look at it and go, geez, tactically you could have, you approached that one wrong, but you're probably always going to lose that game anyway. Like Palace played a pretty decent side,
I still hated the way they went about it.
No, I appreciate that, but like the campaign for them was lost earlier. Now the flip side is, I think if Rovers had got Shels fixtures, they would have got more points. They probably would have gone through. Like Shels definitely had a more generous path. Like they definitely had. When you saw the draw, you thought Shels have a chance here. That was my genuine feeling.
So if they're showing up in games and they're creating enough chances to nick wins and not taking them, is the obvious question then over the off-season they need to make changes up top? And do they have budget?
Well, across the team. I mean, one point to make before we go on to that, I would actually split Rovers and Shels because of it was Shels' first time at this stage. Rovers have been here a few times, so I would separate the football from the other side, the logistics team in. So Shelbourne had a lot of learning to do in this campaign, and they did it. The games were all successes. I was at the Palace game; it was a brilliant occasion. 1,800 Palace fans there, 3,000 in town. There was no trouble. They had the fan zone. So all the stuff that Shelbourne needed to learn as a club, the experience that Rovers have, travel, logistics, hotels. Managing your fans away, they'd 1,100 in Alkmaar. That's a logistical thing, getting them tickets. There would have been a security issue of getting Palace here, and the fact that I think Shelbourne as a club park the football. Shelbourne as a club will be. Rovers have that experience because they've done it before, so there's no need to go into that with Rovers. But they will. Mossy Quinn is CEO. He's not long in the job. The people there, Joey Bryan, his first season, Neil Doyle, and those people, they're not that long at the club, so they will. When they sit down at the end of the season, they will review and go, well, actually, we got that wrong. The hotel there could have been better, or we should have travelled a day earlier. Rovers don't need that because they have that experience. So I think Shelbourne as a club, forget the football. Shelbourne as a club will be stronger for the experience of being in the group stage this year.
So what off-season, they're on the hunt for strikers, are they? Or is there a degree of, no, look, Meepo's going to grow into this? What do we think?
They might. I mean, the most interesting that Shels are doing in the off-season is, like, they've linked up with this company, Jamestown Analytics, which is Tony Bloom's company, and Hearts, who are obviously flying high at the top of the Scottish league at the moment. They've been using Jamestown, and the story of Hearts this year is Claudio Braga with the song, but they've picked up, they picked up a player from Iceland, from Valur. I was in Iceland last week. They actually have loads of good young players coming through. We maybe not get round to it, but like player pool is just a real issue we have in their 20s. But Shels are using that now. And while Stephen Bradley spoke this week maybe about, well, you don't just sign Brazilians because you're Brazilian, the real striking thing, I love this competition. I just love the sort of the variance of teams you can play, and the profile of the teams you play, and you see that some countries are getting it right with recruitment and finding players, because I think the player pool we have is quite limited here in Ireland. And I think Shels, some of the players they're bringing over the winter are going to be unknown to us, and it's pretty obvious that they're going to be looking for a striker in the midst of that. But the way Jamestown and the way that it works, like, it could be someone from the Norwegian second division, like Claudio Braga was pulled out of nowhere. They're hoping that'll be the edge. But I will say, like, they have a squad with a really good age profile relative to probably a better age profile than Rovers do at the moment. I think they're going to be dangerous. I really think they're one of these things where you look at the results and you think, yeah. So I don't think they're a million miles away. I think they're. I think they are. Like, I watched it. I was at Rovers. I found it a very frustrating game. Just like,
we'll come to that.
Yeah, but I watched a bit of Shels when I went home. I was like, yeah, this was a good game. Like, Celia went to Tala and won in October, and we were like, geez, yeah, they're a better side, and they are. They went to the quarterfinals last year. Again, like, Shels acquitted themselves well for a team that haven't been here before. Yeah. So I think they'll be.
So that's a good nil.
I think they'll be. I think they'll be fine, but it's obviously they're not clinical enough, and they need probably a bit more strength in defence.
I think you will see a different Shelbourne next year, and not just up front. And somebody from Shelbourne was saying in Alkmaar that it's unlikely, whoever they do sign, they probably won't sign anyone from within the league. And that's been the way I looked at it before I came in today. I mean, I think 26 players have signed for Premier Division clubs already. They've all either come from within the league or come back. So Max Mata, Chris Fardick, Enda Stevens, who have been in the league. There's no fresh blood. And if you look at other leagues, and it's something Brian Kerr spoke with this a few years ago, the league here was too beige. We're too reliant on Irish players here, Irish players back from England, or British players. So a lot of Scott, look at Ali Coote, Liam Burt, these lads have come in. Ciara McEnroy has been a hit. But I think there is something else there. I think Shelbourne realise that what they have won't be good enough to get points in Europe. They were close this year, we accept that, but the proof is in the table. They were in the bottom. They had 2 points from 6 games. And that, I think, will be... Stephen Bradley again said this the other day, just because someone is Brazilian, as you mentioned, just because he's Brazilian doesn't mean he's good. But I think that's going to be a question for Shelbourne as a club and for the league. Do we import... I looked at some of the games last night. So Larnaca finished 8th in the table last night, so they're straight through. They had one Cypriot player in their team last night. Noah from Armenia did pretty well, finished ahead of the Irish clubs. They had one Armenian. Who else did I look at? Somebody else. Ammonia had a Cypriot club. They had 3 Cypriots in the team. The rest are all a lot of Brazilians, a lot of players from the Balkans. So do we go that way to try and improve results in Europe? But that then dismantled, and Bradley spoke last night about the academy model at Rovers, that the strength for Rovers in attracting players is they've seen Bazunu and Victor Ojvanuna and Michael Noonan. If you come to us, if you're good enough, you will get a chance. Do Rovers dismantle what they have and flood the first team with Croatians and Poles and Slovenians and players from Africa who are good enough to make them better in Europe, but to dismantle your academy model? That's a debate. I don't have the answers, but I think that's a question we're going.
The Irish clubs, I think they've tried to do that before though, but the problem is they've just been reliant on a couple of agents, who, like, you'll have all these Estonian players come in a couple of years ago, and it's through one or two sources. Like, Irish clubs have done it, and those bad experiences have scarred people. It's about maybe doing it a little bit more strategically or with the data, and that's why the Jamestown thing. I know you mentioned it, that the Alkmaar people were talking to Shels, and they're probably like, they have these pre-match dinners, and like, you're talking to the Irish clubs, and it's grand. But once the Alkmaar heard that Shels were working with Jamestown, they were like, this is a more. I think at times Irish clubs have done that, and like, obviously they can't really bring in players from outside until January, until we'll see what happens with their clubs in some winter leagues. But this is a time now where someone is trying to do it, and I don't know if it's going to work, because sometimes in Ireland you have permit rules that are a little bit more complicated than some of those countries. There's minimum payment you have to make to some of these players coming in. It's not always as you might think to get Brazilians. It can be actually really complicated to just do that.
You also have and Bradley referenced this before the match, accommodation. It's however well you might do it, you might get somebody else.
Yeah.
And again, it depends on the age profile. So a 21-year-old, he live in the clubhouse, he live in an apartment, doesn't matter. But if you're signing an experienced player, 28, who's got a wife and two kids, and then he sees how much, well, you can't afford rent in Dublin.
It's a very interesting dilemma that you raise, because the fabric of the league would be changed dramatically, and there is that link with Irish players. And if you get to a point where Shelbourne are doing marginally better in Europe and there's one Irish guy in the team. Now, international evidence suggests fans support the teams. You look across in the UK, where the teams, might have one or two or three home-based players, it doesn't affect the fandom. But it would be a shift in the fabric of this league.
It's a debate to have. So again, go back to Larnaca, and again, a little known club, but they finished eighth. They finished ahead of AZ Alkmaar, ahead of Fiorentina, ahead of Crystal Palace, ahead of Lech Poznan, the second biggest club in Poland. They finished ahead of all them.
Yeah.
But what does it mean for Cypriot football when there's one Cypriot in the team? Is it good? Do Larnaca's job, their directors and the board and the manager, their job is to make Larnaca better? Is that improving Cypriot football? I don't think so. But would Shelbourne feel and I think there was a link there, because a lot of the players there are local heroes. So Meepo's a Dubliner who's been away a lot and come back to play. Evan Caffrey, Sean Boyd, they're League of Ireland kind of legends. Sean Gannon been around a long time, and then the guys who come in, they embed in it. Kerr McEnroy, the fans love him. Would Shels fans feel the same if there was no Dubliners in the team? I don't know. Shelbourne fans can answer that. If it made you better in Europe, yes, but would you feel the same affection if your entire 11 were foreign? I don't know.
But this is where it comes back to the player pool, and this is my point. Like, you look at the Shamrock Rovers team now, like Josh Honahan's gone to Lincoln. They've lost. Okay, Johnny Kenny was only on loan, but
you keep bringing me to Shamrock Rovers.
Okay, but I'm just going to make the point that. And like, Shels are going to start having this now. Like, I'm going to have a story probably today. Lewis Temple, who's a young player at Shels, is probably quite likely to go to Bolton in January. Certainly there's something going on there. What's happening post-Brexit is that a lot of our better players are staying until they're 18, which is terrific. Yeah. But then when they get to 18, 19, 20, that's when they're now leaving. And if you look at, like, Rovers now have a lot of 3 or 4 teenagers who were like from the under-17 squad, and a lot of older players. Shels, if you look at the profile of their squad, it's a better age profile because they have more lads in their 20s. But if some of those start to go... Yeah. Like, they're actually, I think Shelbourne, if you look at their squad, they actually have quite a few English and Scottish, players. I think one of the games maybe only a handful of the players, like Milan Mbanga's there now, is French. There's not a huge amount of players there who've come through, the Irish system there. And I think we have a big issue that because we're losing players at 18, 19, 20, we don't have a great selection of Irish players in their 20s who should be at the prime of their career, because a lot of them are gone. Yeah. So you have to fill them, you have to replace them with other nationalities. But it is a real, it's a balancing act to do that. Like, Cyprus don't really support their national team. We've experienced that going there. The culture there is just different, how their football system operates. One of the big selling points of the league now is very much, this will make our national team better. So you need that link. But it may well be you have all these great players at 16, 17, 18, and then they're gone. And you need to look outside and look overseas for the players in a different age bracket.
Give us, fellas, before we move on to Shamrock Rovers, give us a quick word on Joey O'Brien.
I think he's done. I mean, difficult situation the way it happened. It wasn't planned. He didn't think he'd go to Shelbourne in the first place. He didn't really know. I spoke to him about this time last year. He didn't really know Damien. He was surprised when Damien asked him to come in as number 2. So, but I think his experience as a coach, as a player, he was ideal fit when Damien left. I think he's done a very good job. I think he's learned, and I think the sign of a good manager is, do you keep doing the same thing, or do you learn? He'll assess his staff. He'll assess the players, and that's going to be a hard thing to do, because there's players there who've he was there when they won the league, and it's very, and Bradley has spoken this before, when Rovers need to make changes, they've done their job, they've won you a league, but when it's time to go, so that'll be the hard thing over the season, in terms maybe 1 or 2 players with league medals will have to leave to make room for other ones, but I think he's done very well. I think you're right, the Crystal Palace one may be a little bit standoffish in terms of the approach, gave it up a little bit too much, but I think he's done a very good job.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's done very well. Like, I think he's done extremely well in the circumstances. But the big test is now. Like, I think the one thing to point out about Shels, and this is the problem, like, for them to get back to this level, they probably need to win the league, because that's the real missed opportunity for them. Like, I know from speaking to people at Shels, they saw getting into this league phase as an opportunity in one go to get your seeding level up and to get financially as well, but they have good backing. But look, if they'd have got 6-7 points, that would have put them way up. Like, they're like, the way that seeding is done in Europe, you're not positioned within draws by your league, you're positioned by your individual club standing. So Rovers have this really high one, Shels have a really low one. Their chance of being in the Conference League next year is going to be extremely.
So their seeding makes it harder for them to qualify next year.
Oh,
they have done their seeding no favours with this.
Yeah, and they could have given it a once-off
boost.
And like that's the thing about this collective campaign. The excitement about 2 teams making it was a chance to, like, just this one-off. Like, never had 2 teams from outside the top 30 in Europe from the same league qualified for a phase before, and you thought this was a great chance to power the league further up, and it hasn't really been taken. But the real, Rovers are still absolutely flying in that regard. They're up in the top 100 or top 120 in Europe. Like, they'll be seeded in all the rounds. They were able to get there this year because their seeding was so high as non-champions. For Shels would have to have an all-time campaign to get back, to this level next year from the regular route.
So that's the disappointment.
That's the challenge. They missed a real chance to boost. They played well, but they've let a lot of stuff slip, which could cost them in the short to medium term.
Yeah, that's a good point. Shamrock Rovers then, 31st of 36 teams. A reminder of their campaign, as Dan said, owing to their seeding in part, but also very good performances. They, somewhat unexpectedly made league phase. Santa Clara in Portugal was in August, and then they had a tough group. Sparta Prague 4-1. Also in October, they lost 2-0 to Celje. The point away to AK Athens is a big point, in fairness to them. And then they were at home to Shakhtar. You lose 2-1 again. It's Shakhtar. Breidablik last week in Iceland is a frustrating one for sure. They lost 3-1. The third goal was late on, so they were in the game and would have aspired to get something more against Breidablik. And then last night, 3-1 win against Hamrun. Graham Burke scored, then it went 1-1. Danny Grant scored before half-time, and John McGovern scored in the 93rd minute. Dan, you were covering this game last night. I was really encouraged, actually, with Stephen Bradley's interview on Premier Sports afterwards, because, he's put to him, you won, it's great. And my sense watching the game was, you got away, you left yourselves at 2-1 in a game you should have been 6-1 up in. You left yourselves so open to a European sucker punch. God, yeah. That this game was 2-1 in the 92nd minute was, from a Rovers point of view, criminal. And they could have been sucker punched. And Bradley was, Ashley Rai was like, come on. Because he did have that face. And eventually he did sort of say, yeah, okay, look, it's good to win 3-1. But his overriding sense was he knew they were not clinical last night at all. They kind of got away with it. They were just so the better team. Red card in the game as well.
That was the thing, yeah.
But he knew, God, 2-1, we left ourselves open for a sucker punch. And it didn't happen. They got the third, all as well. But I was encouraged by that. I think that's a very kind of mature it's not just we won in Europe all as well.
Oh yeah. No, that's the thing. Like, I mean, I found it a very frustrating game. I just thought they weren't good at all. Like, I often, and
They created a lot.
like they won, but like what I'm saying is the first 20 minutes, it was just like it was a basketball game. I mean, they conceded a goal. They could have conceded another. The red card probably was key, but again, it was like this dead rubber situation. There was nothing really on it. And it was just sloppy, but completely understandable because it's, again, 55th game of the season or whatever the stat is, and the points we've made earlier, don't need to repeat them. But, like, yeah, they just weren't at the level. Like, I always feel like Irish clubs, when they play at this level, like, they need to be 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Now, it's great that you can get 400 grand and win for being, like, 5 or 6 out of 10. Yeah. That's pretty much, in some ways, that's a great thing, and it's a product of, like, again, you have to move the discussion behind, beyond that sort of patronising pattern that isn't it great they're there, while also at times pointing out resources. It's still hard to compete with some of these teams, but how do you ever improve without having higher standards? And like, you have to really look at it and go, yeah, they were sloppy in the game. They weren't at it, for the reasons we've mentioned. And yeah, they won, but no one is like, oh, isn't it great? You're like, yes, you get the money. This is a great competition because it gives you those opportunities. Yeah. But yeah, they weren't. And look, last week, and I was in Iceland last week. The reality is, like if Rovers had held on to the lead they had in that game, and maybe won by one more goal last night, they would have gone through. And so that's the margin.
To revisit the kind of chat we had at the top, is your sense physically they've dropped?
Yeah, I think so. I think, just as I said, like, I actually think for both these teams in the campaign, the second week was the key one. I still think, like, Rovers lost at home to Celje in the second week, and they weren't at it in October. That's when they had the league basically won at the end of September, and we would have discussed it here. October was when they had that run of, like, losing games. Like October was often when you would expect a team to be peaking in a season, and last year they were peaking in October because they made that late run to try and catch Shels, and then they were steamrolling. Like in Europe, they were really good in October. This time they were sort of flagging a bit, and I don't think they ever really got it back. I think it's been a strange campaign for Rovers overall because I don't think they've played at the levels that they can really at any stage. They played well in Athens in the circumstance, but again with a really patched up team that you wouldn't have expected them to play. Haven't really seen like
a common refrain from Bradley in Europe this year. Maybe it's just only the first half, or maybe it's an entire game. There's been a lot of Bradley saying things like, we weren't really ourselves today. I feel that's been a common thing. He said, we weren't really at it. He said that a lot this campaign.
Yeah, but they haven't, again, like, they probably haven't had the first 11 that got the job done against St. Clara in two legs. They've barely had it since. And sometimes that's by design. Like, they prioritised the FAI Cup over Prague away and Athens away, and went with teams that you wouldn't expect them to see played. They needed to then get the points at home. That's where the Celje game was a killer, because they did have a strong team that night. Yeah. Just didn't perform in that game. Shakhtar Donetsk actually played better than they did against Celje.
Is that fair enough that he's rotating around those? I mean, it's very Champions Cup rugby. The big game away will keep our big.
Well, yeah, but look, I suppose we can't be hypocritical here, right? We're talking at the start about how you're going to cope with this never-ending season. And then you say, well, why aren't you playing your best 11? The reality is, I just think they probably need to restructure their squad, probably strengthen. We always think they have a great squad, and they probably do, but there's gaps in their squad now that have been exposed. They've missed Danny Mandrew with injury, but his pace has been so big for them in Europe. Like, pace is everything in Europe. But like Rovers generally, I will say, like, I love this competition. Right? I will say it again, it's a brilliant format, but it's a little bit mad. Like, they were in pot 2 this year, they were in pot 4 last year. The pot you're in makes no difference to the standard of the draw you get, because you get one team from each pot, including your own one. So last year from pot 4 they got Larne and TNS, and they had a great opportunity which they took. This year, from pot 2 they got 8 teams go through automatically. None of the teams that Shels played against have got into the top 8. 3 of the teams that Rovers played against did. I think 3 of them were in the top 6. They had a really tough route. but equally they could have done better. So you have to find the balance between the two. There's a volatility in this format that makes the analysis of the over 6 games, it can be clouded. Like you look at some of the teams down the bottom, like Aberdeen were second from, but Aberdeen, in fairness to them, 5 of the 6 teams they played were in the top 8. Like they had a really unlucky draw, where some teams are higher up who got a little bit lucky. So it's a weird one that there's a bigger picture. What do these results mean?
Yeah.
It's quite an evenly matched competition.
Yeah.
And the fixtures can really send you another bad year.
On the competition, and again, this isn't being negative, this isn't to take away from the achievements of the clubs in getting there, and as I said earlier on, the off-field stuff, the occasions, everything else, so it's not raining on parade and trying to be negative, but it's a fact this is the third tier of Europe. And Bradley spoke pre-match before Celia about moving the needle and wanting to do better.
He spoke Europa League a bit as the aspiration.
Yeah, so 20 years ago when Shelbourne were up against Deportivo, the aim was Champions League. Now that's changed. Celtic and Feyenoord and Legia Warsaw, all these clubs can't get in there, so an Irish club is going to be. Then it was Europa when Dundalk. Obviously Rovers had the initial breakthrough, but then Dundalk getting points. But now the needle's dropped to the third tier, so we have to be realistic here. This is the third division of Europe, and if this was a league, Shelbourne finished in the bottom 2 or 3, they would have been relegated. If there wasn't a qualification for Europe, they would be going into the non-league. So we do have to accept that, and I think there's a danger as a league, as a country. You look who finished ahead of us, Lincoln Redham. So maybe it's a one-off.
But it's not a proper league. Like a league is where you play every team, home and away.
Okay, but a team from Gibraltar got more points than
but their fixtures allowed it. Like that's what I'm saying. I think there's a reactionary sense to that. Like last year, Rovers finished ahead, I think there was probably an overreaction last year of Rovers finished ahead of Real Betis, Panathinaikos, Heidenheim from Germany, and we're flagging that. But I do think with the beauty of the competition means you can just look at that team from Gibraltar did this and that team from North Macedonia did that. But last year, Irish teams have finished around teams from Poland, Austria. Does that mean the 2 teams finished ahead of Rapid Vienna? Does that mean we're in a better state than Austrian football? No, it's a format. I think that's a danger of going down a road of just too knee-jerk to the results. But there's obviously, I take the third tier point around that. Yeah. But I don't know. I think the format is too much to just read too much into that. Both ways. And we have to remember that next year, if Rovers do well and get 9 points again or 10 points again, and then suddenly start going, well, they finished above, start listing these teams. I think it's a great competition, but I think that analysis of it across 6 games is too small a sample size to be too.
Bradley did speak about this. One of the early games in Europe, I asked him about that idea that is Champions League now closed for Shamrock Rovers? Is it unachievable? And the example is Celtic. If Celtic can't get there, who have 50,000 every week, who have sell players for 10 million. If they can't do it, how can Shamrock Rovers? And he said, that's the wrong attitude. We have to, for us realistically, the next one for us as in Shamrock Rovers is Europa League. But if we say, well, we're never going to get to Champions League, we will never. Now, Bradley, his programme notes you referenced to last night were very interesting, talking to AK Athens, and you're up against the line about the Christmas party that they get.
Yeah, they spend more on their Christmas party than Rovers get winning the
and
league.
These clubs, spend what we would see as mediocre clubs spend 3, 4, 5 million on players. We think it's brilliant that you can get 2 million for Mason Mealy or Victor Rajivanuna. So there is a gap there. But that's what you're right. Absolutely. I was encouraged as well by Bradley's interview last night. I thought the TV moment of the year was Kenny Cunningham to stop being the Grinch. That, man, it's Christmas. You've had a win. Everyone's in good form. You're having a break. Stop. And Bradley kind of laughed and said, "Okay, maybe being a bit harsh."
Fair, Kenny, and I think Ashton was getting at it as well. If they had taken even 3 of those glutted chances, it would have been a great night. So Kenny was saying the passing was okay at times, interplay, you create chances. So it's come on, but deep down Bradley knew.
But the overall point is, and Bradley, to be reflective, and I think Bradley is clever like that. That's why he will go on somewhere else in management. He's spoken about it. He's not just saying, well, this is great, we've got the win. It's how do we do better? And his aim should be, and their aim should not be to be mid-table in the conference. The aim should be to push for the Europa League, and maybe could take 10, 20 years. It may never happen. But to push for higher rather than settling for being happy with a couple of points in the.
Well, there is something damning about October. That's where if you're sit down with Bradley, right? Let's really get into this. Something happened in October, like the loss to Selly at home, the wobbles in the league. The league was won, so you sort of forgive him that. But that's what really cost them here. And you think last year, and I appreciate your point, Dan, about the easier draw and the slightly odd nature of the luck involved in this supposed league phase. But last year they get off to a good start, but that imbues everything. That kind of sets a momentum in motion. the loss to Celje is a bad one. Like, if you're holding Bradley to account, that's a bad one.
I think that, yeah, and I do think, in fairness, a lot of us say at the time, and look, Celje, like, they are obviously, again, they're a better resource side, like, they're a better team. They got to the quarterfinals last year, but yeah, if you want to, like, I think Rovers like played better against Shakhtar Donetsk at home than they did against Celje. I think if they'd brought maybe that level to Celje, like, you have to get home points, you have to get points on the board early, and yeah, there's that balance between being realistic and being fair in what your expectations are when budgets are still modest enough compared to what some countries are spending, but equally having that ability to say, you've been around the block for a long time here, you know, you were off your levels. And I know we talked about what Shels are going to do over the winter. I'm interested to see what Rovers do, because I think what the party line is, and everyone says it, they have the best squad in the country, and like, they do, but I think it's getting to that stage where they really actually need to just be careful that they just need to make some adjustments over the winter, because I think maybe they've looked to certain players who've been coming off the bench, and players like Trevor Clark and Aaron Green. These players have been big players in the league, but they haven't really been involved, and they've a bit of work to do with their squad. And it sounds mad, they've won the double. Bradley says it's their best season ever.
No, but
I think to stay, because the thing about the Europa League, and I just, like, I'm being sort of a bit of a pedant here with some of this. Like, the way European football is structured now is really weird, because you have this Champions path for certain clubs and you have this league path for certain clubs, and it doesn't actually take much for Rovers to get in to the Europa League because of their seeding. Now, they could really struggle in the Europa League, but there's actually teams that have got into the Europa League that they wouldn't be, say, a million miles off at the lower end of the Champions path. But then you come into the Conference League and you have these teams like Shakhtar and AEK Athens who are really teams who have been in the Champions League, and Sparta Prague won the Champions League last year, done it this year. So that third tier element, like, it's how they've done it, UEFA. It's sort of, they're balancing it all out. Rovers could get in the Europa League next year. I don't think that's ridiculous if they get a good draw.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Does that mean they've made a joint step forward as a club to get it?
No, it's a point well made. There are vagaries to the draw which can be misleading on a given year. You have to look at it over 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Whereas the Champions League is like, in fairness, like, Dundalk were within, half a game in 2016. Shels were within half a game in 2004. Champions League is almost unattainable now. That's obviously a problem.
To round off on Rovers, we should mention Josh Honohan, who is going to Lincoln for $500,000, having signed from Cork for 20 grand. I mean, penny for Cork City's thoughts here. And that was only at the beginning of the 24 season. So Stephen Bradley,
he let his contract run down, so that was the compo. But still,
okay.
Well, they've also, his brother, the Rovers got his brother Callum from Cork City as well last year. So it was a double whammy, losing two Honans.
Okay. You look at what we bought Josh for, you look at what we sold him for. That is good business, said Stephen Bradley. You have to understand where you are in the food chain. Whew, glad Hamer didn't say that. So he is saying, in effect, look, rather than letting our players run down contracts, selling for good money, that is the industry that we are in, and we need to get good at that industry. And so, selling a guy for $500,000 instead of letting him go for free. And obviously, we've seen the Melia 1.9, the Ajavanua 2 million. These are big sums, but Bradley was making the point, this is nothing to be down about, nothing to be sad about. This is the industry at work.
It is, and Rovers are, and he said it during the year as well, we're a selling club. And again, that was a good thing to say, because that you might take that as a negative or demeaning to the Shamrock Rovers tradition, but that's what they are. They're selling, but again, it's selling on their terms, selling at the right time. We're still way off in terms of, the idea that it took such a lot of work to get that million plus, that 7-figure fee for Amelia and for Rajavanuna. When you look at the Premier League and you see Forest have signed some guy from France for 25 million who plays one game and then is loaned out back to Strasbourg or somebody else. So we're in that. And Bradley referenced as well that as a league we need to do, because the division, the opinion of the league abroad is still, a lot of people in England still see it as a pub league. That's an outdated view, but that's what they have. So when they come in, they bid for a player and they feel that they can still get away with bidding 10, 20 grand for a player. The one I'll always remember was when Birmingham came to buy Keith Fahey when he was at St Pat's and doing really well, future international. The first offer was 50 grand. That's how they saw Irish football. Now, Pat's, my memory of the deal is they got 350 up front and went up to $500,000. But Birmingham's view of St Pat's and the League of Ireland was, the plate munchers, here's 50 grand and we'd be glad you get it. You know, it's like, we'll give it to you in coins. That was the image. And it will take time to bring that up where you will say, 500,000, don't even talk to us. So if somebody was other players in the league, if somebody was interested in, Michael Duffy is the wrong age profile, but say Dawson Devoy or somebody else, that you don't come in and say, here, we'll 50 grand and we'll give you a few more down the road. It's 500,000. Don't even pick up the phone without talking to us with 500,000. Same as well when you know, clubs were in for, they know that now. So Rovers have done well. They've got, Andy Lyons, Liam Scales, Gavin Bazoo. I actually said to Bradley one stage during the year that in an ideal world, say there was a once in a lifetime event, a club pandemic where all players had to return to their country for whatever. It's not going to happen, but a pandemic. So Rovers get back Gavin Bazunu, Liam Scales, Andy Lyons, Neil Farrugia, Sinclair Armstrong, Adamo Maku. That's a Champions League team. That team that certainly could compete in Europe. It's not going to happen, but it's realism. They have to sell, and they were probably looking now. He really talked up Corey O'Sullivan this week. He described him as the best young defender in the league. He's 19. He's had a run of games. He's played in every game in Europe. So hopefully his next move, if it is beyond Shamrock Rovers, it is not to League Two for 75 grand. It is to a big club for a healthy 6-figure fee.
Yeah. You see, the thing is, the age is the big thing with the Honohan one.
What is he now?
Like, he's turning 25 in March, and he's coming into the last year of his contract. Bradley's comments there, effectively an indirect dig at Dundalk, who through their glory years lost all their players for free. You know, Darryl Horgan, Andy Boyle, Richie Towell. They all, at the end of successful seasons in 2015 and 2016, Dundalk lost their best player for free every year, and that's what happened. And and Bradley's point, you can keep them for another year and you might win a league, but your model has to be Josh Honan. There's been a lot of comment on his feed. The fact he's only going to Lincoln, although Lincoln are they're a League One promotion challenging team now. I think we tend to see our English clubs sometimes as how we saw them in the 80s or 90s on your sort of Shoot magazine or something, like Bolton and Reading are below Lincoln in the table. If we was going there would be no sniffiness. Reading, of course. Yeah. But reality is, like, Lincoln take Ireland seriously, and they were willing to pay €500,000 because they see him going into their side. I know for a fact that other, say, championship clubs would have looked at Honohan, and they probably would have thought, for the money you have to pay, is he going to go in and be our first choice straight away? And it goes back to what Aidan said, that perception of Ireland. We might pay 300 for him, but Rovers like, well, this club is going to pay 500. That's what you have to do. And like it's a tough one because, sorry to make my point, like, I think if Josh Honohan was 20, I think the fee would be bigger. But obviously that perception is we can't really improve someone at 24, 25. And that's why the media and Ajahn Vuna fees are different to these fees, because 16, 17, you can, like, Michael Noonan will probably go for 7-figure sum, and some of the other young players will go for that money. When you get to, I think the point Bradley was making is, yes, you want to get to the stage where your 24, 25-year-olds are going for,
7 figures,
a million. But it's just not realistic because of the strength and the perception of the league at the moment. And the players know, with 1 year left on your deal, Rovers had to sell now because the offers next summer would be maybe 200 grand. And you just, like, they've generated over 7-8 million in transfer fees under Bradley. Really, that's healthy. But it can be frustrating for people too, that you see your best player in the league is going to a League One club. But again, that comes back to the financial muscle and power that you're dealing with. The TV deal, the new EFL TV deals in England, like, are monstrous, and I think I mean, your food chain line is funny because it depends who says that sometimes, but there's actually a massive pragmatism in what Bradley says, and I know that for some Rovers fans, they're like, can't believe he's going to Lincoln, but unfortunately you sit back and you step back from it, and for £500,000 makes perfect sense.
Good business,
yeah.
All right, fellas, great stuff. So before we know it, Christmas over and President's Cup the last day of January, and then all goes again. All goes again.
Like Rovers, the season, there is no such thing as an off-season in football. Anyway, I mean, like, you can go to the Winter Leagues with the Club World Cup and so on. Like, there is no... Where does it stop? It doesn't.
Are they breaking during the World Cup, League of Ireland?
No, so this is the thing. They would have factored it in if Ireland had qualified automatically, but they can't. You can't do your schedule in December based on a playoff.
Where's
in March.
The belief? Of course, we're going to qualify.
Yeah. So they're going to be have an international break in the normal break, which will be that sort of 10 days or so before the tournament, when there probably will be friendlies, where if Ireland unfortunately don't make it, they'll be playing friendlies, and that will be their summer. But they're going to have to play through the tournament, obviously with the time difference, the games, it's not as, you're not going to be going head to head like with sort of a lot of the matches, as we know, with these 2-3 in the morning sort of kickoffs and stuff. But no, it's a frustrating one for them. But in fairness, you would give them enough stick, but I don't think they could have. Fair
enough.
We can still watch. Pico's going to be there. Max Mata, who's just signed for Pats, he's probably not in the frame for New Zealand at the moment. He's played for them before. It would take an immense season for him to get into the New Zealand squad, but stranger things have happened, so there might be a little bit of Pico as well. We'll all be whatever with Ireland, whether Ireland get there or not. We'll all be.
We have our team.
Pico just has to do not break glass here. Like Pico, I mean, it's Pico is a full all action player, he full blooded tackler. He's not effective. He's not, but I must admit, I feel nervous for him here. Do you have this coming? And the way he plays, and the fixture schedules are quite demanding.
I would not think less of him if around April he started saying to Steve, I just got a back strain.
I
don't know what it is. I can't.
I think we take life too seriously sometimes. They're playing Spain in the World Cup. This is not the time to get a 6-week hamstring injury.
No, could you imagine?
Why
would you say that?
Sorry, but it's just you can't avoid it.
Okay, Dan, Aidan, super. Thanks, fellas.